My brother's family recently moved in with me and our parents, and now they're furious because I refused to babysit their kids while they took some relaxation time. My parents actually sided with them, so I packed my stuff, moved out, and stopped paying their bills. What's she doing here? My mom's voice sliced through the grand hallway, sharp and icy, hitting me right in the gut. My father didn't even bother looking back. Beside him stood my younger brother Dylan, arms folded, his mouth twisting into this smug, half-grin, half-scowl expression, clearly amused by the tension. Nobody even bothered saying my name. Not one glance acknowledged I was human, with a face, feelings, or a past worth remembering. My mere presence was enough to make all three turn away like I was a piece of garbage, something messy and inconvenient that should have been tossed out instantly. I still vividly remember the day they kicked me out. It was winter, a week after my 18th birthday. The ground was rock solid with ice, and the biting wind stabbed right through my clothes. Standing outside our colonial-style house, what was once my home, all I had was a ratty old backpack stuffed with faded clothes and exactly $14 crumpled up in my pocket. No goodbyes, no good luck wishes. My mom, Teresa, just stood behind a curtain sipping red wine, looking right through me as if I was some unpaid bill finally out of her hair. My dad, Mark, said exactly one sentence. "You're grown up now, Sophie. Figure it out yourself." Everything happened in a flash. No one asked where I'd be staying, if I had somewhere to crash, or even if I had enough for a meal. Dylan, 3 years younger and the golden child of the family, just stood at the staircase, recording the spectacle on his phone with a smirk. Always the favorite, always forgiven, Dylan was the kid my parents bragged about, their pride and joy, while I was shoved to the side like unwanted luggage. As I walked away from that house, I forced myself not to look back. If I did, I knew I'd break down, beg for forgiveness, but I had promised myself nobody would ever make me kneel again. Feeling like a walking disappointment, I trekked nearly 5 miles into town, to Deer Ridge, the center where an all-night convenience store stayed lit. I curled up behind an abandoned bus stop, wearing a threadbare hoodie while the freezing wind sliced through the brick cracks, scraping my skin raw like shards of glass. My stomach was twisted in hunger knots. Every breath hurt my chest, but I couldn't cry. Tears would just freeze on my cheeks anyway. The next morning, desperate, I wandered the streets searching for a safe place. The community center was packed, the church locked, tried getting a job at a bakery, then a coffee shop. No luck. Who would hire a homeless girl without an ID or proper address? My stomach growled so loud people stared. Night 2 wasn't any kinder. I ended up behind a local deli, struggling to keep warm against its kitchen vent, clothes quickly reeking of burnt meat and grease. At least I didn't freeze to death. Hugging my bag tightly like it held the last crumb of my childhood, I jumped at every sound, a car door, a dog barking. Fearful that something horrible awaited me, yet I had no alternative. Day 3. I walked to a car wash and asked about work. The manager eyed me suspiciously, then scoffed. "Sorry, kid, we don't hire drifters." My face flushed, but I held steady, swallowing the humiliation. Nightfall came, and my spot behind the deli was occupied by a homeless man clutching his empty liquor bottle tightly. Too afraid to get close, I shuffled off behind Ruby's Grill, a small restaurant with inviting light spilling from its slightly opened back door. Curiosity got the best of me, and as I peeked in, suddenly a woman's voice shouted out of nowhere, "Hey, what the hell are you doing back here?" Startled, I jumped up and found myself staring into the face of a middle-aged woman with curly brown hair, flour dust all over her apron, grip firm around a soup ladle. But unlike others, she didn't recoil or look at me like trash. Actually, it was like she was expecting me. Speechless, I was about to turn around and bolt when she spoke again. "If you're planning on sleeping back here, you better mop my floors first." It took me a second to understand what was happening, but I quickly nodded. She introduced herself as Ruby, and she owned the restaurant. She didn't ask questions about my past, no digging into why I was there. She just handed me a mop and pointed at a steaming dish of chicken stir-fry. "Eat first, mop after," was all she said. Gratefully, I devoured every bite, then worked diligently until midnight. With the floors shining, Ruby waved toward a small storage room. "There's an old mattress back there in the corner. Ain't the cleanest thing, but beats sleeping on tiles." Trying not to show the tears threatening to overflow, I nodded. For the first time in 3 freezing nights, I had food and shelter away from the rats. As I lay down under my jacket hood on that firm mattress, feeling worn down but strangely hopeful, I exhaled slowly. My family didn't know where I was. Probably they were sitting comfortably beside the fireplace, having dinner, unaffected, while I, Sophie, slept surrounded by boxes of restaurant supplies, still alive, still unbroken, and determined as hell to stay that way. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of pots clanging and the unmistakable smell of crispy bacon filling the kitchen. My body was sore, my eyes were burning, but there was something about waking up on an actual mattress, however lumpy, that made me want to hold on to that small moment of comfort just a bit longer. "What are you still lying around for? Get up and mop the floors." Ruby's voice was sharp, direct, and carried this no-nonsense edge, like she'd spent years running a military kitchen instead of a small-town diner. Heart racing, I practically tripped over myself trying to get untangled from the old blanket. But she didn't scold me, at least not in a cruel way. She just raised an eyebrow, tossed me a mop, and said, "You work, you eat. Clean now, feed later." That day, I scrubbed the floors until they sparkled, washed dishes in boiling water without gloves, hefted heavy boxes of supplies that made my back ache, and dumped overflowing trash cans that stank like week-old leftovers. By the time the last customer left around midnight, I could barely stand. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to quit, to just sit down and never move again. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel useless. I didn't feel like some shadow trailing behind my family, a burden they refused to carry. I felt needed, useful, even if it was just for something small. 3 days later, Ruby handed me a faded, oversized work shirt, one of her old employee uniforms, and slapped a plastic name tag on it. The tag read, "Sophie, Kitchen Assistant." My hands trembled, not because the shirt or title were anything glamorous, but because for the first time in years, someone saw me as someone. I wasn't invisible. My name had a purpose. Ruby wasn't the warm and fuzzy type, but she noticed things. When my hands were raw from scrubbing and reddened from hot water, she'd quietly leave burn cream or a fresh towel where I'd find it. She didn't say much, it was rare, but the way she'd glance in my direction gave away more than words ever could. She saw me, not as a problem, not as a failure, but as a person. "You're not a bad kid," she said one night while peeling potatoes. "You just got shoved out of the nest earlier than most." I stayed at Ruby's Grill for nearly a year, living in that cramped storage room and working double or even triple shifts to scrape together every penny I could. The tips weren't much, but I saved them all. The smell of cigarettes, cheap coffee, or the temptation of candy bars no longer crossing my thoughts. Every spare minute was spent focused on one goal: getting my GED. I borrowed books from the library and studied in the back room at night, even when my eyes burned and exhaustion tugged at my eyelids. Sometimes I'd fall asleep at the small, wobbly table with a pen still clutched in my hand. Still, whenever I thought of my mom calling me a burden, all the nights I spent in the cold and the mocking video Dylan filmed, I'd grip that pen even tighter instead of giving in. By the time I turned 19, I had aced my GED exams. When I handed Ruby the certificate, expecting no reaction, she surprised me. She carefully placed a small cupcake on the counter, topped with a single flickering candle. "Congratulations," was all she said. And honestly, it was enough. I cried that night, not because of the cupcake, not even because of the accomplishment, but because, for the first time in years, I felt alive. Not just surviving, not just scrambling to make it through another day, but alive with hope for something more. Determined to build a life for myself, I applied to Central Oregon Community College to study business administration. I figured there was no way I could spend the rest of my life washing dishes or scrubbing floors if I wanted to escape the cycle I'd been stuck in. There was so much I didn't know: contracts, finances, the basics of running anything, but I wanted to be ready for whatever came next. When the acceptance letter arrived, I almost burst into tears right in the kitchen. I had been so used to rejection. Ruby, ever stoic, tossed me a set of old keys that looked like they belonged to a century-old haunted house. "There's a spare room upstairs," she said with her usual no-nonsense tone. "You'll need it to study better than you can behind the fryer." For months, I balanced my schoolwork during the day and my shifts at Ruby's Grill at night. Most nights, I'd get only about 3 or 4 hours of sleep, but I didn't complain. How could I? That silent rage and drive inside me, the one that had carried me out of my parents' house and through those brutal first nights on the streets, pushed me to keep going. 2 years later, I crossed the stage at graduation wearing a navy blue cap and gown. No family cheers came from the audience, no proud siblings screaming my name. It was quiet, except for my own heart pounding with pride as the dean handed me my diploma. I filmed the moment. Later, I'd replay it 100 times, reminding myself, you did this. Without their help, without their support, you made it. Soon after, I received a full scholarship to the Portland Business Institute. Once I was admitted, I packed everything I owned into a single duffel bag, moved into a shared apartment with 3 other strangers, and started my new chapter with only $12 in my wallet. Life in Portland was a grind. I waited tables on weekends and studied from dawn until midnight, pouring everything I had into learning how the world worked. From supply chains to contracts to profit margins, I absorbed as much as I could, all while juggling night shifts and endless applications for internships. The cash was tight, and I was exhausted, but quitting wasn't an option. Finally, after countless interviews, I landed an unpaid internship at a startup called NutriHealth. They specialized in dietary solutions for cancer patients, and while the work didn't pay, it taught me the ropes of sourcing suppliers, branding, and negotiating contracts. Every meeting, I scribbled furious notes, asking questions from everyone I could, from the warehouse workers to the CEO. By the time I graduated at the top of my class, I had a plan. For years, I'd been dreaming of creating something meaningful, driven by the knowledge of what it felt like to have nothing. That's when the idea for a nutrition company struck me, specialized meal plans for people with heart conditions, diabetes, and post-op recovery. I called it Renew Life Nutrition. The word renew meant everything to me. It symbolized the process of starting over, healing from losses, and building from scratch. It was tiny at first, just me making small batches of product in a shared kitchen, hand-packing boxes for hours at night, then biking around the city delivering them myself. Some nights, I would live stream on social media, explaining the benefits. At first, nothing happened. But slowly, word spread. 3 years later, Renew Life Nutrition exploded. It became the go-to product for hospitals in Oregon, and by the age of 25, my company was worth over $5 million. A year later, after a big investment, the valuation hit almost $20 million. It felt surreal. The once homeless teenager, kicked out, mocked, and abandoned, was now running a company that helped others recover and thrive. When people asked me, "What's the key to your success?" I'd simply smile and say, "It started with a mop and someone who treated me like a person." Not a day went by when I didn't think about the nights I spent behind the cold walls of Ruby's Grill, or the bitter, icy streets where I lay shaking from the cold. And while my company, Renew Life Nutrition, soared to success, I never let myself forget where I came from. That hunger, that pain, that sheer desperation, it was a weight I carried within me, always quietly fueling my determination. But I never thought I'd have to face my family again. It was a late November evening, and the air was crisp and chilly, carrying that subtle warning of snow. I had just finished speaking at a local entrepreneurs conference when it happened. The invite arrived in an elegant white envelope with gold embellishments, delivered to my Portland office. At first glance, I thought it was some random corporate event, until I read the words inside. There it was. Dylan's name, his fiancée's name, their upcoming engagement party. My brother, the golden boy of my parents' world, the one who skimmed through life effortlessly, stepping on the rest of us to climb higher, was celebrating his engagement. They had tracked me down after all these years, not to reconcile or apologize, but to flaunt yet another milestone I had no part in. Every logical part of me told me to throw the invitation in the nearest trash can. But something inside me refused. Something old and raw and unresolved whispered, "Go." For the weeks leading up to it, I wrestled with the decision until Nathan, my best friend, and honestly, my lifeline during the craziness of building Renew Life, finally set me straight. "Just show up," he said one night over coffee. "Don't go for them, go for you. Walk in there like the boss you are, and remind them who they kicked out that night." And so I did. The night of the party, I arrived at the grand ballroom of some high-end, ridiculously glamorous hotel. The chandeliers sparkled like crystal snowflakes, and the air smelled of expensive wine and fresh orchids. I stepped inside wearing a sleek burgundy evening gown, the kind of dress that demanded attention. My heels clicked against the marble floor, sharp and deliberate, as if announcing my arrival. Heads turned, murmurs started, and glasses of champagne froze mid-air. The first face I locked eyes with wasn't my mother's or Dylan's. No, it was his fiancé, Sean. He was standing by the bar, champagne glass in hand, his jaw dropping like he'd just seen a ghost. I gave him a cold, polite smile, one that didn't reach my eyes, and strode forward. "Oh, look who decided to show up!" My mom's voice snapped across the room. Teresa's tone dripped with the venom she saved especially for me. Her perfectly painted smile wavered slightly as she assessed me, her gaze flickering between my confident posture and the far too expensive dress she'd no doubt convince herself was a rental. I didn't waste breath on her. There would be plenty of time for that later. Instead, I turned my attention to Dylan. He stood near the foot of a staircase, his arm locked possessively around Sean's. Dylan was still unmistakably my brother, yet more polished now, molded by years of parental favoritism and their endless resources. His smile was smug, but there was something artificial about it. Like deep inside, he knew I could destroy the carefully curated image he worked so hard to build. "Sophie," Dylan said, with mock warmth. "I didn't think you'd show up." "Oh, I couldn't stay away," I replied, my voice cold but steady. "A family reunion? How could I miss such an event?" A ripple of whispers spread through the nearby crowd as people started realizing who I was. I knew most of these faces, family, friends, colleagues of my parents, all complicit in the years of turning a blind eye while I struggled. It didn't matter now. Compared to them, I was untouchable. Pretending not to notice their stares, I approached Sean and handed him a sleek black envelope. His brow furrowed in confusion as he accepted it. Dylan leaned closer, looking uneasy now. "What's this?" Sean asked, glancing at me, then Dylan. I smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Something I think you deserve to know." As he slid the contents out, the color drained from his face. His hands began to tremble as he read the papers inside, his champagne glass forgotten, the liquid sloshing slightly over the rim. "Dylan," Sean said, his voice suddenly tight, "what is this?" Dylan's face hardened. "It's nothing. Don't listen to her. She's just trying to stir up trouble." Sean didn't even hear him. His gaze suddenly swiveled toward me, barely able to form a sentence. "Is this real?" "Very real," I said simply. "But don't take my word for it. The envelope contains all the proof you'll need." "What proof?" Dylan snapped, his voice rising, panic evident. "She's lying. She's always lied. She's only here to ruin this for me. Don't trust a word she says." If his outburst was meant to intimidate me, it failed spectacularly. I turned toward Dylan and tilted my head, calm and unshaken. "This isn't about ruining your night, Dylan," I said, my tone cutting but even. "It's about making sure the truth doesn't stay buried any longer." The room was dead silent. Sean's face twisted with betrayal as he looked at the evidence in his hands again. The details were all there, things Dylan had worked so hard to cover up. Lies, schemes, and a betrayal so deep, there was no way Sean could ever see him the same way again. Sean turned back to Dylan, his voice shaking. "You lied to me. About everything." The room erupted into hushed, gasping murmurs. Across the floor, I could see my mom frozen in shock, her glass of wine trembling in her hand, while my father stared blankly as if he couldn't believe the moment was real. But it was. For so long, they had operated under the delusion that they were untouchable, that their lies would stay buried, that I would never have the strength to come back into their perfect world. How wrong they were. As I stood there, watching the cracks in their carefully built facade widen with every passing second, something deep within me settled. This wasn't revenge, not really. It wasn't even about justice. It was about closure, about reminding them, myself, and everyone else in that room that I wasn't some forgotten, helpless girl anymore. I was stronger than the lies they told. stronger than the version of me they tried to bury 9 years earlier. And I wasn't finished yet. The air in the ballroom was thick with tension, and for a moment it felt like the whole room had stopped breathing. Dylan's carefully constructed world was crumbling in front of everyone, and he knew it. Sean stood there, still clutching the envelope, his face pale and tight with anger and disbelief. He looked like he wanted to speak, but no words came out. He was still processing the betrayal. Meanwhile, Dylan's composure in real time. His face flushed red, his voice dripping not with confidence but desperation now. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Sean. Don't let her manipulate you like this." He turned to me, his sharp tone failing to mask the tremor underneath. "What do you even want, Sophie? You couldn't move on, so you came here to spread your misery around? Grow up." I met his glare with absolute calm. "What I want has nothing to do with you, Dylan," I said, my voice even. I took one slow step forward, my heels echoing against the marble floor. "This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability, something you've never had to deal with." The guests collectively leaned in, captivated by the chaos unfolding in front of them. My mother, Teresa, broke out of her stunned silence, her sharp voice slicing through the room like a dagger. "Enough!" she shouted, visibly trembling, her wine glass clinking against the table as she set it down with too much force. "Sophie, this has gone on long enough. Do you have any idea how pathetic you look barging into your brother's engagement party with this spectacle? You're here because you're bitter. Bitter we didn't coddle you. Bitter you didn't have what it took to be part of this family." I turned slowly to face her, the woman who had once looked at me like I was nothing more than a failed investment. "Oh, I'm not bitter," I said coolly, meeting her glare with my own. "And trust me, I'm not here because I care about what any of you think anymore. I'm here because you spent years lying to people about who you are, because you thought you could crush me and I'd just disappear. Here's the thing, Mom. I didn't." Her face blanched at the word, Mom. Maybe because I hadn't called her that since the night she turned her back on me. My father, Mark, had been sitting quietly by the bar, pretending to ignore the growing disaster, the same way he had avoided every uncomfortable confrontation in his life. But now, all eyes were on him. "Say something," Teresa hissed through gritted teeth. But he stayed silent, his stoic mask slowly cracking under the weight of it all. "Typical," I muttered, shaking my head. "You haven't changed a bit, Dad. You've been standing in the background letting everyone else take the heat, just like you always do." The room went dead quiet again as I turned to face the crowd. "For years you all bought into this image of their perfect family," I said, the cold authority in my voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife. "But behind closed doors, it was all a lie. Because the truth is, I wasn't the rebellious, irresponsible problem child they painted me to be. I was a kid thrown out in the dead of winter because I didn't fit the perfect picture. They kicked me out, wiped their hands clean, and acted like I didn't exist." Across the room, I saw faces shifting, friends of my parents, distant relatives who hadn't seen me since I was a teenager. Their discomfort was written all over them. Maybe they were realizing the cracks had always been there. Maybe they were wondering why they hadn't questioned the family's perfect facade before now. To Dylan, I said, "You think I came here to ruin your party? Give me a break. You're doing a fine job of that on your own." I turned my gaze to Sean, who flinched at the weight of my words. "Don't worry, Sean, the lies don't stop with this," I added, tilting my head toward the envelope. "It's only the tip of the iceberg with him. But hey, honesty's a hard thing to come by in this family." Vanessa, Dylan's fiancée, finally snapped. "Oh, that's enough with this sob story," she hissed, stepping forward and tossing her champagne glass onto the table. "You come in here all high and mighty, and for what? To tear down the man we're all here to celebrate? You're just jealous. You're still the same desperate little girl who can't stand being left out." I smiled faintly, genuinely this time. It didn't even reach my heart. "Jealous? Of what exactly?" I said, my voice razor sharp. "Of spending years trying to survive while you two played house? Of being independent, standing on my own 2 feet, while Dylan's success is nothing more than a shiny facade propped up by our parents' favoritism? Trust me, Vanessa, jealous isn't the word you're looking for." Vanessa recoiled slightly, but Dylan stepped toward me, anger radiating off of him in waves. "You've made your point," he snarled low enough that only I could hear. "Now, leave." "No," I said, crossing my arms. "Not yet. I still have one more thing to share." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a flash drive. Its metallic surface caught the light, drawing all attention toward it. I held it up for everyone to see. "This," I said clearly, "contains evidence of fraudulent activity at my parents' clinic, the one my dad's been running for over a decade. Insurance fraud, falsified medical records, pure theft, all of it." Gasps rippled through the crowd as I continued. "For those of you privileged enough to look the other way all these years, here's what it boils down to. Hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen under the guise of medical care. Patients were tricked into paying for procedures they didn't need, insurance claims were forged, and money was funneled into private accounts overseas." Someone in the back coughed nervously, while others exchanged horrified whispers. I caught a glimpse of the one person whose reaction mattered most in that moment. Mark. He looked utterly destroyed. His calm, detached demeanor had disappeared entirely, replaced by something frantic: fear, shame, anger. He looked past me, his face frozen in a grimace of helplessness as the weight of his secrets crashed down all at once. "Is she lying, Dad?" Dylan asked, his voice cracking as it hit him just how deep the rot went. "Tell me she's lying." Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "You think I'll stop there?" I said, turning to the crowd. "Think again. This family doesn't just carry skeletons in the closet. They built a mansion on top of a graveyard." At that moment, two figures entered the room. Men in sharp suits, badges clipped to their belts. Everyone turned as the pair strode silently through the crowd, stopping in front of my parents. "Mark and Teresa Collins," one of the agents said, his voice cold and steady. "We're here on behalf of the IRS. We need to have a conversation about your accounts, and you're both coming with us." A stunned silence descended over the room as the agents escorted my parents toward the exit. My mother protested loudly, frantically, but the agent cut her off mid-sentence. "Anything further will be said on record, ma'am." Dylan stood rigid, clutching the edge of the table, his face pale as the realization sank in. And me? I stood there, quietly watching it all unfold. No anger, no triumph, just cold resolve. I turned and without another word left the ballroom, the past squarely behind me, and my head held high. As I stepped out of the grand ballroom, the cold December air hit my face, sharp and unapologetic. But for the first time in years, it didn't bother me. I welcomed the chill, the clarity it brought. Behind me, the echoes of chaos from the party began to fade, the whispers, the gasps, the shattered illusion of the Collins family. Inside those walls, the people who had once thrown me out into the cold were now facing the very kind of abandonment they had condemned me to. But I didn't feel triumphant. There wasn't a single ache of satisfaction in my chest, no swell of pride in watching my parents be escorted away or in seeing Dylan's perfectly polished world collapse. The truth is, as much as I had planned and worked for this moment, it wasn't the destruction I needed. It was the closure. It was being able to walk away knowing that I wasn't the broken girl they had left behind. Nathan was leaning against his car just outside, hands casually stuffed in the pockets of his jacket. His ever-present, easygoing smirk softened slightly as he saw me approach. "Well?" he asked, raising one eyebrow. "It's done." I loosened my grip on my clutch as I spoke, my voice steady but distant. "It's finally done." He tilted his head, studying me with quiet curiosity. "Do you feel better?" I paused, staring out at the city lights flickering in the distance, their reflections bouncing off the glossy pavement. "I thought I would," I admitted, my breath fogging in the cold air. "I really, really thought I'd walk out of there feeling lighter. Like all the anger, the frustration, the hurt would just disappear the second I turned my back on them. But it's still sitting here," I said, pressing a hand to my chest. Nathan stepped forward. "That's because moving on isn't about tearing them down," he said simply. "It's about deciding to stop letting them weigh you down." I stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. He was right. I hadn't done all of this for revenge, Not really. I'd spent so many years driven by anger and bitterness, but deep down, all I ever wanted was to reclaim my own story, to prove, to them and to myself, that I was more than the scared, forgotten girl they left standing on that frozen doorstep years ago. And looking back now, I could see it clearly. I was more. I had built something from nothing. Through every sleepless night spent studying in the dim glow of a storage room, every grueling double shift, every rejection, every setback, I was no longer reliant on their love, their approval, or their validation. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being powerless. Maybe it was time for me to stop carrying the weight of their shadows altogether. Nathan seemed to read my mind, as he often did. "So," he said, leaning back with a faint grin. "What's next for you, Sophie Collins the Untouchable?" The sound of my family name on his tongue made me flinch slightly, but I recovered quickly. "Sophie Collins doesn't exist anymore," I said, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. It was true. She hadn't existed in a long time. Sophie Collins was the lost, frightened kid who dreamed of a family that would love her back. I wasn't her anymore. I was just Sophie, and that was enough. "What's next?" I repeated thoughtfully, crossing my arms against the cold. I think it's time to stop looking back. Time to let them keep their mess. I've got new things to build. Better things. Bigger things." "And cake?" Nathan teased, his grin widening. "Because honestly, you've been in there for hours, and all I've been hoping for is an excuse to go grab cake." I laughed. This time, a genuine laugh. Warm and free, one that felt like it belonged to someone lighter, someone who had finally let go. "Definitely cake," I replied. "Lots of cake. Chocolate. With strawberries." Nathan opened the car door for me, giving me an exaggerated bow. "Your wish is my command," he said, waving toward the passenger seat. "Let's get celebratory sugar levels where they belong. Off the charts." The city lights stretched ahead as Nathan drove us toward Grace's late-night bakery. We didn't talk much during the drive. We didn't need to. The hum of the car engine and the steady rhythm of passing streetlights were comfort enough. I stared out the window at the quiet streets, remembering all the nights I'd walked them alone, balancing exhaustion and determination on a razor's edge. When we reached Grace's bakery, the warmth inside hit like a hug. The scent of fresh-baked desserts filled the air, rich and inviting. Grace, the no-nonsense baker with an impeccable memory for her customers' favorites, greeted us with her usual playful scowl. "Back so soon, troublemaker?" she said, squinting at me over her glasses. "Let me guess. Chocolate cake with strawberries." "2 slices," I confirmed, smiling. "And a scoop of vanilla ice cream for each, please." She muttered something about us spoiling our appetites at midnight, but moved effortlessly to her station, assembling 2 perfect servings of cake. When she placed them on the counter, the strawberries gleaming under a drizzle of chocolate syrup, I felt a strange sense of calm. We carried the plates to our favorite corner table, the one by the window, where the soft glow of string lights outside made everything look warmer, softer. Nathan dug into his cake instantly, but I paused before taking my first bite. Sitting there in that small, quiet bakery, with the weight of the evening behind me, I let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like years. "This feels right," I said softly, more to myself than anyone else. Nathan glanced up, mid-bite, and smiled at me. "Of course it does." He gestured toward the cake with his fork. "Cake fixes everything." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help smiling. "Not everything," I said, "but maybe it's a good start." As the night wore on, we stayed at that corner table, sharing stories and laughter that came easier now than it had in years. The whispers of my past no longer felt so loud. My parents' voices, their judgment, their rejection, they all felt distant, like an old song you could barely remember the lyrics to. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their apologies. And I didn't need to fight anymore. My life was mine now. Completely and unapologetically mine. As we stood to leave, Nathan grabbed one last cookie from the counter, tossing a few extra bills in Grace's tip jar. The cold air greeted us once again as we stepped outside, but it no longer felt harsh. It felt fresh, like the start of something new. "So?" he asked again, tucking his hands into his jacket. Was it all worth it? I looked up at the night sky, the stars winking faintly through the haze of city lights. Then I looked at him, my oldest friend, and said the only thing I believed in that moment. Every second. And with that, we walked away from the bakery, the smell of chocolate and strawberries clinging to us like a comforting memory, leaving behind the baggage of the past and heading toward the open road ahead.